Sound is on.
Hello, I am going to do today another in my series of videos about the situation in Syria. And in light of the terrible events that happened and are still happening, by the way, between the new regime in Syria, the jihadist regime led by somebody called Ahmed Ashara or Al-Julani, and the Alawi community of Syria. So I would like to devote my talk today to the Alawis of Syria. And first of all, I would like to start by giving some numbers and geographic locations of where the Alawis are. So of course, the main concentration of Alawis is in Syria, where they constitute about 2.5 million people, which is about 13 to 15% of the Syrian population, maybe a bit less. The numbers are not so precise. And they are concentrated mostly in the area of the mountains in northwest Syria, all the way to the beach, to the coast, the cities of Latakia and Tartus. Tartus is a port place, is a naval base where the Russians have had their naval base for so many years before the Soviet Union, later Russia, until now, by the way. And of course, there are enclaves of Alawis in other parts of Syria, but mostly they are in that area. They are also in Lebanon, in the city of Tripoli, in North Lebanon, where there is a Alawi neighborhood, by the way, alongside the Sunni neighborhood. And when there are troubles in Syria, between Alawis and Sunnis, there are troubles immediately in Lebanon between the Alawis and the Sunnis. But they number there few tens of thousands, not a big community. There is a small village on the area of the borders between Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, which is called Rajar, a very small village of about 2,500 people, maybe 3,000. But then there is a big community of Alawis in Turkey, in the province called Hatay, which until 1939 was part of Syria called Alexandretta, but was annexed to Turkey through a decision of the League of Nations at that time, with the support of France on the eve of the Second World War, in order to accommodate Turkey. And in that province, apparently the number of Alawis is in the few hundreds of thousands, all the way to 500,000. So it's a big community, but still very, very small in the overall context of the population of Turkey, which is 85 plus million people. So that's about numbers. Now about the religion. The Alawis are not Muslims. They are not even Shias. The Shias in Syria are the Ismailis, which is a community of about 2%. The difference between the Ismailis and the Twelfers, as they're called, the main branch of Shiism, is about the identity of the last Mahdi, the Imam. The Ismailis and the Twelfers have a different belief as to who he is. I don't want to get into this religious situation, just to mention that the Ismailis are Shiis, considered to be Shiis, and they are numbering in Syria about 2% of the population, 2%, few hundred thousands, mostly in the area of Homs in central Syria. And their main urban center is a place called Salamiyah in the province of Homs. But they are Shias. The Alawis are considered very close to Shia Islam, even though they are not. And the reason that people say that they are Shias is because in 1973, the leader of the Shias in Lebanon at that time, Imam Musa Sadr, who later disappeared in Libya, which is another story, gave some kind of religious recognition or sanction to the Alawis of Tripoli that we mentioned before. And since then, they are considered to be Shias, even though many Shia theologians never accepted really the ruling of Imam Musa Sadr, which was taken to be much more political than religious because of the connections at that time and later between the Alawi regime in Syria and the Alawis of northern Lebanon and the Shias of Lebanon altogether. Okay. So the Alawis religiously are different than the Muslims in all kinds of ways. And why are they so despised? Why are they so hated and loathed by Sunni Muslims all over the world, but in Syria in particular? First of all, there is a very famous fatwa by the great scholar Ibn Taymiyyah, who died in 1329, a 14th century scholar, who became later on, after his death, of course, his teachings became very influential over the teachings of the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, the leader of Wahhabism. Ibn Taymiyyah considered the Alawis to be worse than the infidels. Worse than the infidels. Now, bear in mind, if the world is between the Darul Islam, the nation of the believers, the Islamic Ummah nation, and the Dar al-Harb, the house of war, the infidels, or the rest. If you are worse than the infidels, what we are. And as we know from the history of the relationship between Sunnis in Syria and the Alawis really have been considered to be, as some Alawis even said during the Syrian civil war of recent years, as vermin, as subhuman, that should be killed. There should be genocide against them. They are forbidden in contact with the Sunni population. Yeah. And why is it? Because there are elements in their religion which is secretive. They'll come to that, which may sound a bit Christian. The Trinity revelation that they believe in. There are elements of paganism according to what people say about them. Some of them believe in the ritual of the moon. Some of them believe in the ritual of the sun. And there are other elements in the religion which do not conform with Islam altogether, also with Shiism, for example. They are not forbidden from using alcohol. I can go on like this. But definitely, religiously speaking, there are all kinds of elements attached to their religion, which therefore consider to be so heretic, so fundamentally opposed to Islam, that led to this sense of so much hatred towards them based on religious grounds to start with. When it came to modern Syria, we'll come to the politics a bit later on. So there is this religious problem. We have to understand it. It's very, very, very significant. Very significant. The Alawi religion is secretive, and they are divided between two groups of people: the Amma, the overall Alawi community, and Hassa, the special people or the religious people, which is more or less like the division in the Druze religion between the Jual, those who are ignorant of their secrets of the religion, and the Hukal, those with the Akel, with the brains, the religious people. So it's a secret religion. Why is it secret religion? Obviously, because they were persecuted from day one, and they needed, therefore, to keep their secrecy. Socially speaking, they are divided into four major clannish groups, four big tribes, and the tribes are divided into sub-tribes. Yeah. The mythologies, they are so united, they are totally united, they are one group of people because of this persecution that we mentioned and the legacy of history that comes with it. True up to a point, but not beyond. There have been troubles between tribes. There have been conflicts. And if we look at the 50, 60 last years, the house of Assad, and when the Alawis came to power in Syria, we see that Hafiz al-Assad was responsible to the killing of some prominent Alawis. I'll mention one name, General Muhammad Umran, the early 1970s, the detention of a famous rival of his in the Baas party, we'll come to that, and the Alawi community, Salah Jadid. Later on, the disappearance of a guy called Razi Kanaan, who was the head of Syrian intelligence in Lebanon and was considered to be connected with the murder of Rafiq Hariri, the Sunni prime minister of Lebanon, and the Syrian regime somehow, how to say it, made sure that he disappeared, killed, and he was Alawi. There were troubles within the Assad family. First of all, he was married, the father, Hafiz, to a member of another prominent Alawi family, the Mahlouf family, that politically the Mahloufs were on the side of the Syrian Social Nationalist Party of Anton Saadeh, which is a party that somehow we may need to talk about when we talk about Syria, but not on this one, in this video, whereas the Assads were in the Baas party. But even within the family of Hafez himself, there were troubles between him and his brother, Rifat. Because when Hafez got his heart attack in November of 1983 and was hospitalized in Damascus with the fear that he is going to die, his brother Rifat wanted to claim the leadership and mobilize the militia that was under his command. We'll mention them in a minute. The Saraya Difa, the battalions of defense or the units of defense. And another Alawi general that was loyal to Hafez, Shafiq Fayyad, the commander of the 3rd Armored Division, then mobilized his troops around the ones of Rifat Assad. And there was almost an Alawi civil war, or if you will, within the Assad family war, that ended up with Hafez Assad recovering, miraculously or not. And then later on, even though Rifat was nominally vice president, it was all in the family, you know, he was exiled. He's still alive, by the way. And he's living on billions of dollars that, of course, were part of the overall corrupt system that was created around the Assad family that he was part of. The Mahluf side of the family, by the way, are also billionaires. And after the beginning of the civil war in Syria, one of them said, look, I can donate $1 billion to the poor people of Syria and just remove grudges about poverty of some Sunnis. So everybody, of course, said, why would you have such $1 billion to spare? Where did you get it from? So we understand, of course, it was all part of a corrupt system. So the Alawis have always been united up to a point against external enemies, but divided between themselves and divided also politically. I'll give you an example that will surprise some of my viewers. In 1936, when for a short while it seemed that the French mandatory authorities would give independence to Syria, 5 Alawi dignitaries wrote a letter to the French government claiming that, God forbid, don't do that to us, because we don't want to have the same fate as Alawis that Muslims or Arabs are preparing to do to the Jews in neighboring Palestine. There is a debate among historians, and I have to emphasize a debate. I have an opinion about it, but the debate is whether one of the signatories was the father of Hafez Assad, Suleiman al-Assad, or not. I believe he was. There are those who say that his signatory is not authentic, it's not him. And there's, of course, people that are the ones that try to defend, the image of the Assad family as being the guardians of Arab nationalism and so on. Then we come to the point of politics in modern time. How did the Alawis come to be so dominant in Syria? It started with the French mandatory system, which established so-called État d'Alawite, a state for the Alawis, after they took over Syria and became the masters of Syria and Lebanon in 1920-22 onwards. It was, of course, a fictional political entity, but it, for the first time, recognized the Alawis as being a distinct, respectable community in a place that until then everybody was looking down at them and despised them and hated them, and loathed them. But more happened, and this is creating the troupes spéciales, as they called it, the French, the local militias, which were basically composed of Alawis and some other minorities. So from the 1920s onward, the Alawis have an history of being more represented in the armed forces in Syria than any other community. And it ended like this, or continued like this, and then ended like this also after the independence of Syria in 1946. Then, of course, the Alawis needed a political solution to the problem of being a despised religious minority. And the political solution was found in the Baas party, which was supposed to be a secular pan-Arab nationalist party, not based on religion. So the mobilization of Alawis to the army on the one hand, to the Ba'ath Party on the other hand, created a coalition here, which ended up in the coup d'etat of 1963, on the 8th of March 1963, which later became the founding day of the establishment of the Ba'ath regime in Syria. After 1963, during all kinds of internal struggles, the groups within the Ba'ath Party that became dominant were composed mainly of minorities, particularly Alawis, less so Druze and Ismailis. They are the Shi'i group that we mentioned before. It was called the Others coalition, Alawis, Druze, Ismailis. And as of 1970, when Hafez Assad became the ruler, it was mostly based on Alawis, not only, but mostly on Alawis, which became dominant in the Ba'ath Party, which was the political umbrella of the regime, which were dominant in the military and in the network of intelligence security services. In this network, among of the main dominant figures was Rifat Assad, that I mentioned before, whose militia, the battalions of defense, was responsible for terrible atrocities. I'll just give one example. On the 26th of June 1980, there was an attempt on the life of Hafez Assad that was foiled by the Muslim Brotherhood. At that time, there was also a mini civil war in Syria that ended up in the terrible massacre in Hama of 1982 of about 40,000 Sunnis by the Alawi army. But in the 27th of June 1980, a day after the foiled attempt on the life of Hafez Assad, over 1,000 inmates, Muslim Brotherhoods, in the prison of Tadmor, Palmyra, in the desert, a famous historic place, were executed in the most brutal way by the Syrian regime. They were digging their own trenches, killed them, and buried them there. By the way, in 2015, ISIS took over this prison as part of the civil war at that time in Syria and burned the place, destroyed it, detonated it, burnt it, and so on. And there were lots of atrocities on both sides. Definitely the Alawi regime was responsible to terrible atrocities. There's no question about it. Now, we don't get into all these details because we talked a lot about it already in previous videos. So why is there any surprise of what has happened recently in Syria and what is still happening and will happen? Now, to say that is not to justify the terrible atrocities that are happening in Syria, committed by the regime of this Ashara, who is now dressed up with a tie and a jacket and suit and looks like a respectable, almost Western-like politician. He is not. He is jihadist. He is Sunni jihadist. I'm saying it in order to put all this in historic context. This is what I call the revenge. Is anyone surprised that they do it in Syria to the Alawis now? After the collapse of the Assad regime that we talked all about before? We don't get into these details now. No one should be surprised. But if there are people in the West who are surprised, it is because we would like to believe in the West that people behave in Syria or in countries like that the way we do. I know it may sound a bit patronized for some people. How does he say something like this? Are we superior to them? No, we are different, and they are different from us. And let anyone judge everyone whether it's better or worse. That's something else. It was so obvious that there would be troubles against the Alawis. And they happened. And finally, they even came to the attention of the Western media. Finally. The numbers are thousands that already have been slaughtered. The videos coming from Syria are terrible. But in order to conclude, after we put in context the overall situation with the Alawis, who they are, where they are, what they are, and how they came to be what they are, I would say that we are not in the beginning of the end of the sectarian issues there. We are not even in the end of the beginning. And as I said before, I'm saying today again, the troubles will continue. 2.5 million Alawis in Syria are not going to be slaughtered. There is not going to be a genocide against all of them. There will be troubles. the seeds of the next civil war were sown in the events of the last few weeks, in which, according to conservative estimates, 4,000 people were massacred. And what happened to the Alawis does not bode well, because it is being understood by other minorities as what can happen to them. Christians, partly also massacred, Druze in the south, Kurds in the north. All kinds of rumors about agreement between the regime and all these communities. Take those with so much grain of salt, with so much of it. That's my suggestion. So, to conclude, it's not about being pro or anti-Alawi to explain or to justify what is happening. It's just to put it in context. 60 years of Alawi oppression of Sunnis could not end peacefully, and did not and would not. And all this history of the situation with Alawis of centuries is coming to the fore now. When you see the videos and you see the level of hatred towards them, the level of collective humiliation of them, you understand what sectarianism is all about. So, my viewers, the future of Syria is very, very unclear. It's not going to be stable. It's going to be dark. And the ghost of sectarianism, Alawis now, others before and after, is there to remain. So we shall have more to talk about Syria. Thank you.